So we're going to resume. We're going to do some more stuff with Node. So we've looked at some of the basics about blocking and non-blocking code. We've looked at this strange closure function. Okay, let's build a new file, new JavaScript file. We'll call this one tax calculator. So what we want to do here is we're going to load this file using our browser. So we're going to use an HTTP server to create a web page. When we load the page, we're going to pass in as part of the URL a numeric value, and then we want to take that value, calculate, and display the tax and total on it. So we're going to need the HTTP module. We're also going to need a module that will allow us to read URL parameters. So there's a separate library for that. And then we're later on going to add in another module, not a built-in module, that's going to allow us to do some currency formatting. So we'll write our callback function. We'll want our server to run on port 3000. And our anonymous callback will take a request and response. So we'll write an HTTP header of 200, like we did last week with our content type of text plain. And then at the end, we'll just do response.end. So this should allow us, if we run this file right now, it should load a blank web page at the URL localhost 3000. So this is almost exactly what we did last week. The only difference was last week we also included a hello world message. I guess we could put in the heading. We'll put it in H1. This line 13 is important. Otherwise, our page will hang. It will never finish loading if we don't call response.end. We'll just get an infinite loading in the browser. So this is exactly the same as our hello world from last week, just with a different message being printed to the screen. So if I open up my terminal and run my tax calculator, we should be able to load this page in a browser. So it says our server is running in the console. So mine prints out at H1 tag with our heading. Yep. So exactly the same as the hello world we did last week, we're just printing out different text. So what we want to do is write our URL like this. We want to be able to run something like this. If I pass 100 in, we're going to want to display 100 as the subtotal. We want to multiply that by 0.13 to calculate the tax. And then we want to add those two numbers together. And we want to display all three of those values. The total, the tax, sorry, the total, the subtotal, the tax, and the grand total. So we're going to need another library, another module in order to be able to read the parameter part of our URL. So when we installed Node, we also got a built-in module called URL that allows us to manipulate, parse URLs. So we're going to call the parse method of the request URL. I guess this should be read the URL parameter string. So this gives us the suffix, anything that comes after the question mark in our URL. Yeah, it's basically the equivalent. Or in .NET would be the request.query string. So not the base URL, the list of parameter keys and values that come at the end. And then from here, we can get the key name called subtotal. So we're going to be including in our URL a variable, a parameter called subtotal. Okay, you know what? It's asking us to use let instead. We'll have the let versus var discussion in a minute. We probably do want to use let. There's a long discussion which we can have a look at. It will work with var. Yeah, even looking in my notes, I used let. Yeah, I mean, we could use const here because these things are not going to change. It would be okay to use const in those cases. Now we may need to parse this. And again, Ken, we're going to come back to JavaScript typing in a minute. We'll see what happens. So maybe we'll just run the file now. We shouldn't actually, we're not outputting anything. Let's just run the file and see if we get any errors in our console as the file is so far. So we've added the URL parsing library. We're trying to read. To shut it down, you hit Control-C. And then to start it up again, you just press the up arrow and it'll rerun the file. So we do want to run it again because we've made changes to it. So this time you need to append this suffix on. We need to pass in a subtotal parameter and give it a value. Okay, so our page loads. I'm going to check my developer console. Okay, that's all right. I'm not worried about the encoding for now. Sorry, I don't understand the question. It might be. Okay, so yes, you may need a slash before the question mark. So let's add the subtotal and the text together. And then let's try to display these. Sorry? So I'll put line breaks before each one. So we'll run this, I'll stop it, restart my server, we'll run it again, we'll see what happens. Okay. So we didn't get an error, but we don't have the right values. So why? Right. Parsing them as strings. So what we need to do here is use parse float. And actually, rather than those, this should also probably be as well. BR tags, since we're a browser. So if I So I want to parse those as floats. I put it in the URL. Yeah, I've actually entered subtotal equals. Now there's some debate about, so you could see without the parsing, it treats them like, it treats my subtotal like a string value. Okay. So this is where you see now some people say JavaScript is untyped, some say it's weakly typed, some say it's loosely typed. There's some debate. We'll kind of dive into this in a bit. But in any case, our variables, they're certainly not strongly typed. So without explicitly casting these as numeric values, it can't perform, JavaScript compiler interpreter won't perform math on them, right? It's going to treat them like strings. If we want to perform mathematical operations, we need to do an explicit cast. So if I stop and restart again, let's see what we get now. Okay, so now we get the right values. It's actually treating them as numbers. Sure. So because JavaScript isn't strongly typed, because it's treated as a string, our URL library parses that whole thing as, and all the keys and values as strings. It's not smart enough to know, hey, that subtotal is a number, and automatically it's going to know to perform math with it. So we have to explicitly cast subtotal in order. Do it up here instead. Good idea. Let's try that. Yeah, if we only have to parse it once, okay, let's try that. That's probably a more efficient way to do it. All right, let's try it like that. I'll stop and restart and try again. Yep, works fine. That's a good suggestion. So we can just do our parse. All right, thank you for that suggestion. That works better. So long as we convert this string to a float, then it knows it's smart enough to do the math with both. Good suggestion. I want to do one more thing with this file and then revisit these discussions on let and var as well as on typing in JavaScript. So what other things should we do with this file? What's wrong with it? It's working, but there's one fairly glaringly obvious improvement that it needs. Yeah. So what we want to do is we should format these. And not only we can format as decimal, but we can actually use a currency format. So to do this, we want to use another Node module, but this module is not one of the built-in ones. We don't have it already. We've got HTTP and we have URL and we have FS. All of these are installed on our system globally when we install Node. But what happens when we want additional functionality that doesn't ship with Node? That's where npm comes in. So let's go to npmjs.com. I think we now have to sign up for this. We didn't used to, but we do now. So I'm going to sign up. I've used this for years, but don't have an account. And I will just go and verify my email. So NPM is a global repository of publicly available packages for Node. So any additional functionality we want to add to Node before we write it, we should probably look if there's an NPM package already out there that already does what we want it to do. So the package we want is actually called accounting. Here's what it does. Tiny JavaScript library for number, money, currency, parsing, and formatting. Average of 153,000 downloads per week. So it's been on for quite a while. So we want to install this NPM package into our project so that we can use it. Now there's two different options we have when we install an NPM package. One option is we install it specifically to the project we're building, which is what we'll do in this case. We're not going to use this library in all our projects. So we're installing it locally just in this project. There are other tools, there are some other libraries, like one I think I mentioned last week, that we may want to install globally because we'll want to use them widely. So NPM has a global like a global repository storage as well as a local one. So it shows us the command to install. We use npm I for install and then the name of the package. But we're going to want to do one thing first before we do this. No. It's Node Package Manager. And most of the plugins, generally they're open source, and you can go to GitHub and you can see find the source code for any of your NPM packages. So what I'm going to do is stop my server. Now, we could just install the package, but typically, before we install any NPM packages, we want to initialize NPM in our project. And what this is going to do is set up a configuration file that will track all of the packages and versions for us. Okay. When we get into using Express, Express is going to do some of this for us, but for a couple of weeks we can do it manually. So what we want to do here is run the command npm init. So we're going to initialize npm in our project. So what it's going to give us a series of prompts to build out this configuration file that's known as package.json. Okay. So it's going to prompt us with a number of values to put in the package. And it gives us, if we just hit enter, it gives us the default values. So it's saying, what's your package name going to be called? Well, it just takes the name of my folder, which is fine. I'll just hit enter. What version of the project is this? Defaults to 100, which is fine. We can put in a description here. Just put in starting with npm. Entry point. So what's our startup file? So it just finds files in the project. For now, we'll say tax calculator. .js is our startup file. Yeah, you will. It may be in a different order. We may have different versions of npm installed. You can ignore it. So if you want to tie your project to a Git repository that you've already created, you can put the URL in here. If not, you can just hit enter. That's interesting. So try it all in lowercase, Josh. So yeah, for test command and Git repository, I'm just going to leave those empty for now. Keywords, again, I'm going to leave empty. Author, license, I'm just hitting enter. And then it gives me a preview of what my package.json file will look like. Now we can manually override any of these things later. If we want to change them, we can. It's going to build package.json that looks like this, and it says, is this file okay? I'm just going to hit enter for yes. I ran the command npm init to initialize npm, and I just hit enter all the way through until it's done. So now we have, it doesn't show up. I just have to, I think, refresh my project. So here's the package.json file that it creates. Again, we can change any of these values. They're not set here in stone permanently. We could create it ourselves. But generally what this is going to be used for, and we'll see in a minute, is it's also going to be used to track any NPM packages. So any dependencies that our project has and what versions of those dependencies it needs. So now that we've initialized NPM, I want to install this accounting package. So the command is here, npm I for install accounting. So at my command prompt, npm accounting. So this is going to install this package so that we can use it to use currency formatting in our JavaScript. So what this will do, it's a small package, so it installs pretty quickly. It goes to the GitHub repository where that package lives, and it pulls down a copy. You do need an internet connection for this. So notice now, you'll notice a couple things about my project structure. One is package.json got updated and is now tracking that our project has a dependency on that accounting package and the version. The other thing you'll notice is we now have a node module subdirectory added to the project. So this is our local copy of any dependencies that we install in the project. So if we add a dependency, let's say if we're doing Google sign-in, we'll do an npm I, we'll find a package, it'll add it to package.json and add it here. So if we look in node modules, we now have a local copy of that source code. As soon as I installed the accounting package with npm. Now, in some versions, instead of I, you might see the command npm install accounting. For years, the install will still work. A couple of years ago, they shortened it, so you could just type I instead of install. Does the same thing. So you may see some documentation where you see packages being installed with the install command instead of I. They're equivalent. So now that we've installed the package, it's available for us to use in any node file in this project. If we went back and opened our lesson 1 project, we don't have accounting installed. It's not installed globally. It's only a dependency for this particular application. So now I want to include it here. So we want to add the accounting npm package currency fee. We don't have to specify a path. Because this is listed in package.json, Node knows if we just require it, it's first going to check if it's installed globally, and if it's not installed globally, it's going to look in the Node modules folder automatically. We don't have to say, go look in Node modules, that's where accounting is. It knows it's in there. All our local dependencies will be there. This is automatically found in Node modules. So we link to it, and then we can use our library and this package has a function called format money. So if we run our application again, we should get local currency, and it just reads the regional settings. If you're in your currency settings were, if your regional settings were Japanese, it would give you the symbol for yen and know how to format the currency according to the regional settings. So I'll run my tax calculator one more time. Server's running, and now I can go back. And now we've got properly formatted currency. So this is how we would use npm to install a project-specific dependency. We need accounting for lesson 2. We're probably not going to install it again in other projects. We only need it for the purpose of formatting this file in this project. So that's one way for us to install a dependency. We just by the default, when we do npm I, it's going to install that dependency only for our specific project. Our other option is we can also install dependencies globally, and then we can add them to any project. And there are some development tools that we want to do this with. So we're going to install one other dependency here. And that is, so I'm going to search here. I think we may have looked at this briefly last week. I think I did pull it up. So I always want to install Node Mon. So what Node Mon does is when we start our application, it watches for changes so that if we change the code and save, it'll automatically restart the application. Because right now, if we go and make code changes, we won't see those changes won't take effect until we manually stop and then restart our server. Node Mon automates that. So rather than this being specific to a project, this is a tool we want to install globally because we're going to want to use Node Mon in all our projects. So they'll just auto restart whenever we save changes. So this is also massively popular, 1.8 million weekly downloads. Almost every Node developer I know uses Node Mon while they're developing. It's not a production time. It's not a runtime. Like once we deploy to a server, we don't need Node Mon. But while we're developing, it saves us from having to constantly hit stop and restart the server. Node Mon will do it for us. So instead of installing this in the Node modules folder in lesson 2, we want to install this one globally. So the way to do this is with the -G flag. So if we do npm I or npm install -G Node Mon, it'll install it globally, and then we can use it in any project. If we used -G, yes, then that would mean when we installed it, we're installing it globally in our npm cache, so any project could use it. No. You should only install things globally if you're going to use them widely. Generally, you should install just the dependencies that are specific to your application. Because it means then every project is loading all of those dependencies. So you're adding unnecessary dependencies potentially to many projects. So I'm going to stop the server here. I'm going to do npm I -G and Node Mon. So Node Mon is not going to get added to the Node modules folder because we're installing it to npm's global repository instead. It's probably a permission issue. Yeah, try npm space -v. That'll tell you your version of npm. But your node commands run? Do node -v. Okay. I think but it runs fine at the Windows command prompt. Okay, we can maybe look at it at a break. I think it's a permissions problem. So I'm going to do npm I never actually ran the command. So I'm going to install Node Mon globally. Well, sometimes also it does show you a log because sometimes when you install one dependency, that dependency requires a whole slew of other npm packages. So you're installing one, but you get all the things that it depends on as well. So you can see I installed Node Mon, but it actually added 2 packages. So it's not in Node modules, but it's global. Yeah, 221 dependencies on Node Mon. So you can see this. NPM will tell you here. So Node Mon has 10 dependencies, and there are 1,700 other NPM packages that if you install these, you're going to get Node Mon, because those packages require Node Mon. So now if I want to start my project, rather than running the node command, I can actually run Node Mon, and then we should be able to run our file, but then make changes. Our server will do an auto restart. I'm going to start my server with Node Mon. So notice we get a little different message. To restart at any time, enter RS. It's starting, so it logs out our console. So this is green. Our task calculator should run again, which it does. But now, if we want to change something in our code, maybe around these, I'll put this in, and maybe we'll put in some subheading tags. Around our little labels. So I've wrapped the words subtotal, tax, and total in H2 tags. If I hit save now, watch the terminal below. So when I hit save, as soon as I hit save, it says it's restarting due to changes. And now if I go back, my browser doesn't auto reload, but if I refresh, my changes have now taken effect without me having to do a manual stop and restart. So Node Mon is an efficiency tool so that we can rewrite, save our code, and we don't have to go through the headache of the stops and restarts.
Just feels like something that would be really easy for them to copy, whether or not it's variously. Is there a reason why
well, IntelliJ is really still just the IDE, right? The developers of the Node packages, they're independent, and they can do what they want with their packages. Actually, that reminds me, there's a huge warning that comes with NPM. This happened a few years ago. Worth spending a few minutes on, because you should be aware of what happens. Yeah, this was 3 years ago. Here's what happened. It's kind of an interesting story. So here's what happened, yes. So somebody developed a really popular library, an NPM package called Kick. He registered on NPM, and it was basically about doing some some optimizing of some JavaScript code was the idea. So he put it on, and it was a hugely popular library. The problem was there's a development company with the same name, Kick Interactive, and they had a mobile app, and they trademarked the name. And they said to the developer, we own the name. You cannot publish an NPM package with the name Kick. The problem was, and I think it says in there, and he said, my package is open source. So anyway, they got into a bit of a pissing contest. And eventually, he wound up deleting his package. The problem was there were 273 other packages on NPM that depended on Kick. and thousands of Node projects that had these as dependencies that now broke because they got into this argument. So ultimately, he decided, I'm not publishing stuff on NPM anymore. So I mean, this is a bit of the danger. Yeah. So it was, and his package was actually right. This is what it was: a widely used chunk of 17 lines of JavaScript code that was used to write justify text. But it had, and it may have said somebody in here. Oh yeah, and one of those packages was Babel, which is one of the most common JavaScript compilers. So Babel was using his package, and millions of projects used Babel. So when he pulled it, he set off this chain of events that broke millions of Node projects. That's a fair question. So there is an alternative now to NPM. NPM is still, so there are some people who are not thrilled with NPM. There is an alternative whose name escapes me right now. So this is one of the warnings when we're relying on NPM. Now, it's also not as much of a problem because when we install them, it is installed locally here, right? We're not relying on NPM right now, but if the developer of the accounting packages breaks it or gets into a dispute, pulls it off NPM, we can't get updates to it. Kind of like a WordPress plugin. If that plugin dies, there's no future support for it. Yeah, this is one of the benefits. I mean, with .NET, they have their own package manager system called NuGet, but at least with NuGet, Microsoft owns and manages it. It's not quite as much of a Wild West as NPM is. Well, but at least Microsoft has a commercial interest in making sure this kind of thing doesn't happen, right? Which NPM doesn't. It's open source, so occasionally you have these things happen.
No, it's important that because like this is actually something big right now. Is that the Linux kernel is published under GPL2, which means that any developer has the right to rescind the code at any time. So right now there's a bit of tension because there's a bunch of developers threatening to rescind the code, which is great. Pretty much.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest with you, it's a fair question. I don't know what their license is. I believe here, when you publish a package, you've got different, there's options. So there's different open source licenses. So when you if you publish a package to NPM, which I know some students have actually done in the past, created and published, you can choose your license. Well, it sets out the terms. So the default license here is ISE, sets out the terms of use for other developers if they want to use your software. So there's some different open source licensing options. I'm working on it. All right, let's take a pause here. When we come back, we will also just revisit JavaScript typing and let versus var. A few discussions we can maybe walk through. We'll play around with a couple other JavaScript things, and I'll give you a simple lab to do, which will be due on Monday. All right.
Wait, this Monday?
Monday at 5 o'clock.